Welcome to Keeping Up with Trends. This is Fed Zach, Senior Trading Strategist here at CMTrading, and I'm joined with Sergio Davids, our host. So, it's holiday season and it's happening, but the markets are still trading. So, what's on the agenda today, Sergio?
Hey, Fred. I thought we could recap, 2023. We've got about 72 hours left, of the year. There's been so much has happened, and I thought we could just look back. So, kicking things off with the banking slash non-banking crisis. I mean,
Right.
I remember when we had a couple videos beginning of this year, and I was talking about what's going to happen to these banks, etc. I mean, just to recap for those listening, we had in the States, the collapse of First Republic Bank, Silicon Valley Bank, followed by Signature Bank. I mean, it for all intents and purposes, it looked like, a
The
big
banking
deal
industry is
and
coming to an
and
end. It's
yeah, I
dying. It's
remember.
the end of the world.
Even further abroad, we had Credit Suisse, who I know, were in trouble tail end of 2022, and then they were, bought over beginning of 2023. So yeah,
And the media
it
loves
was a
to play
big deal. That kind of
the
yeah.
end of the world crisis collapse. It's
Yeah, and
catastrophic.
I remember you specifically saying, it's very localized because had it been, a big bank like JP Morgan or something, then, maybe there'd be a crisis. And turns out you were right.
Huh, thank you.
So, I mean,
Good that we have
for
this
the
in
government,
recording.
yep. It's just interesting for me that this kind of thing can happen, and of course the fallout from this was increased regulation and specific regulation to stop this kind of thing from happening.
All right, so let's
But
do like this. You know, in in the Wild Wild West, there was this guy called Wyatt Earp,
right,
and he's a icon. He's a legend in American folklore. Now, America doesn't have such an old history. It has about 400 to 500 years worth of history. Really, 400 years. I mean, altogether. Um, and um, United States was founded in 1492, and until it became a nation, and then things had to happen. But there was this thing of the Wild Wild West, right, where you had these outlaws, and law wasn't. It was being made up as things were coming along, right? And you had this outlaw who had no other ways of making a living besides being an outlaw. So it paid to be an outlaw. I'm sure the excitement and the thrill. But at one
yeah,
point, consciousness had reached him, and he had epiphany, and he became I guess you could say, a repentant, right? And he decided to become the law, because what better way to serve the people? What better way to serve himself? You can't beat him, join him.
right.
So it's kind of funny because on the list of Silicon Valley Bank, which was the first bank that went down in 2023, some of the biggest guys, the chairmen of the board of directors, were formerly the other side. They were the law.
Hmm.
And they flipped into, these head of board and trustees, and, you know, they were playing with fire. And presumably they knew that they were what they were doing, but apparently, well, they didn't. So a couple of things about the U.S. banks. The largest bank in the United States is J.P. Morgan Chase. They
Right.
merged J.P. Morgan. If J.P. Morgan goes down, the rest of the country goes down.
Jeez,
It's that integral.
it's
It's
that big. Wow,
that
and
big.
that
It cannot
integral
fail.
to U.S.
Sure.
economy.
Their total assets stand at about $3.4 trillion.
Jeez, staggering amount of money.
Okay, so the top, I would say, four banks in the United States hold above $1 trillion in assets. And the next 10 to, I would say about 10, hold about $1 billion and above. of assets, like 100 billion, 200 billion and above. So the exponential capacity that JP Morgan Chase could offer the marketplace is that much more evident. Now, JP
Yeah.
Morgan, we're talking on December 29, 2023. Now, JP Morgan hit new yearly highs of $170 per share.
Jeez. I mean,
And its
there's no
all-time
crisis
record,
there.
its all-time record highs is about $173 per share. So what
Wow.
banking crisis are we talking about?
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
that's the thing, like you have to weed out the noise from the smoke, and it's just a matter of that. In the media, they love to fearmonger. I don't know what it is. They end up
Because
selling
bad
more.
news sells.
Well, it's not just bad news. It's just, oh my gosh, it's news because they don't have anything to talk about. What are they going to talk about? A cow that crossed the
Look,
road?
it's a very lazy way to do journalism. You know, you're supposed to just report in the news and then add maybe an opinion, but they go with whatever, will make people afraid of next. I notice it a lot in US media, especially.
Yeah, but the rest of the
There's
world is
always
following suit.
fear mongering. But I mean, not to say that US exclusive to this. I mean, South African media does it well as well.
Yeah, because they know they got you.
Yeah,
Psychologically, they got you. They own you. You're dependent on them. You're the one that is bringing the bad
yeah.
news.
It's
You're the
dangerous
one
also. Very dangerous to do this.
that's very dangerous. It's
People
very
taking their money
harmful.
out of banks, figuring out what to do now. Yeah.
It's
You mentioned
yeah.
JP Morgan, hitting, new highs. I suppose this is a good time to bring up Nvidia, a company that has just done an amazing job over the last 3 years, going from selling, graphics cards to, some of the other players in the market, Microsoft and Dell, to becoming $1 trillion company. I mean, that level of growth is just incredible.
So this goes back to what was his name? He was one of the largest fund managers in the United States in the 1980s, 90s. He wrote a book, One Up on Wall Street, and his name is Peter Lynch. And I
Okay.
recommend this book to anybody, okay? Because here's a normal guy who just paid attention to what society was doing and then put all the money, the billions, into those type of companies. And he became super wealthy as a result of it. Now, the wealth is the outcome, it's not the goal.
Right.
But what's the point of me telling you this? Now, there was a guy on Bloomberg that came on the news about 10 years ago. This guy took $25,000 and he flipped it into $2 million. So how did this guy do this? It was before Bitcoin. I'm not
Wow.
talking about Bitcoin. I'm not talking about Bitcoin billionaires who have
Yeah, yeah.
their own right and have earned it. I'm talking about a guy who just was curious to see what the marketplace was absorbing, what the marketplace was watching. He noticed I'm not a big fan of this. I don't know anything about it. I don't have a TV in my house. I don't want to expose my children to TV in my house. And I
Right.
don't have a television. But he said that he started watching this show called Hunger Games, right?
Yeah. Very familiar with it, yes.
Okay, I have no idea what I'm talking about. I don't know the concept of it. I don't know if it was a game. I don't know if it was a book and then
Yeah,
became a
yeah.
series. I don't know anything about it. But the guy paid attention to it. And he started looking up who owns this, production for for the series.
Right.
And he saw that this was a public traded company. So he bought options on it. And within 2 years, the guy made $2 million out of $25,000.
Jeez.
Now, he's not a rocket scientist. He took a
Yeah.
risk here. But, he just paid attention. And that's in the video also. Like, if you're a gamer, I'm not a gamer. I'm not in that world, right?
Right.
But if I'm in that world and I say, hey, This thing is addictive. Hey, there's a growing younger population that is really, just playing this. If you look, I mean, again, I don't see this as much, but I do every so often. If I go on YouTube, this pops up where you see this 20 to 30 something, people that are vlogging on a, regular basis
Yeah.
about
Well,
how
yes,
to beat a
streaming
game.
about. So what's fascinating for me about like the current gaming culture, right? You mentioned the age then. That's important because all the kids that grew up with games, right? My generation. So we're talking, at the arcades. This is before handheld, consoles. All of us are now in our, late 30s, 40s. We now have, got jobs, families, etc. But fundamentally, we still love games. So the market shifted from trying to aim at kids, you know, to try and aim at, adults. And just over the last 3 years, you'll see a huge boom in gaming industry. I mean, when was it? Back in 2021, gaming overtook. I mean, obviously, COVID had a lot to do with it, but gaming overtook Hollywood, just in terms and music, just in terms of the sheer money that can be generated from it, because you've got a much older, mature audience that can afford gaming PCs, that can afford the latest graphics cards, they can afford the latest consoles. So when it comes to Nvidia, they were poised to become a big player even 3 years ago, and now look, um, I uh, um, I think it was a few months ago I mentioned when I met one of our own clients, and he was telling us how much he's smiling in all the way to, well, the proverbial trading bank, because we got him to trade, suggested he trades Nvidia, and he's super happy with us. And I mean, why wouldn't he? He's got Nvidia shares. But this is quite an older gentleman, and I'm trying to think of a time where you would suggest gaming stock, a tech company like that who's specifically in the gaming realm, to anybody. And now look, it's
So
just, yeah.
yeah, so you've got to put your ear on the ground. You've got to be part of culture to really pick up on these things. And this goes back to my Croc story back in the day.
Oh yes, I love that story.
When my wife was pregnant and she needed, larger shoes because she was pregnant and she needed something comfortable. And she also needed to take a shower with these type of things. And she bought them. And they were the ugliest things I think in the world. I didn't buy a pair of Crocs for at least 5, 10 years later. But I did invest in the company because I saw that this thing was coming up and everybody's wearing them. So it became like a really fantastic thing. Now, here's an interesting thing. It's not just Nvidia that is doing fantastic. Companies like Intel and AMD, which
Oh yeah,
they are the bricks and mortar of the chip making business. Okay, Intel is probably the best chip maker. AMD is a little bit more structured, but Intel is a little bit more. If I could compare them to like another industry, I would say AMD is like the IBM.
yeah,
Intel is like the Microsoft, and Nvidia is like the Apple. Because Nvidia is a very creative, very out of the box
yeah.
and
They also
younger.
managed to hit the AI bandwagon in a very unique way,
Yeah, and
especially
so,
for gaming. So yeah, no, I agree with you. Very innovative.
but Intel has not lost a beat either. I mean, Intel
No,
is
and they've
also
been going on for how long now? More than 20
on
years,
a
I
tear.
think.
What's that?
Intel, you know.
Well, it's interesting. Intel hit a high of $69, about 67, $68, back in 2021 when it was still, we were coming off of the pandemic and it was a tremendous recovery in the markets. And then it came crashing down to $25 a share. And it made a comeback to $50. It's not at
Yeah,
60, it still has, way to go, but it's relatively doubled in the past year.
I think I think it's going to be really interesting to see where all these chip makers, take us, considering that not too long ago we had a chip shortage, and now we've got AI, helping out these chip makers produce incredible things that we wouldn't even have thought of, even 5 years ago. So yeah, it's an awesome space to be in. But moving on from a space that's not so great, this year, sort of has been dominated by, economic uncertainty. It was all over the headlines and still is, with specific attention to, Federal Reserve and the FOMC. So for anyone listening, would you want to do a recap?
Yeah. So what happens is that for most of the beginning of 2023, we saw a crazy inflation uh, that we haven't seen in about, I would say, 40 years, since the 1980s. Um,
Cheers.
and that was something that was really very concerning for everybody. Um, and that's something that the Federal Reserve had to really put a finger on the pulse to make sure that it didn't go crazy. I mean, it came down in 2023 from a high of 9.1% in May of 2022. And as a result, and responsibly and rightfully so, Federal Reserve increased interest rates over the past year. And it has gotten to a point where it seems that inflation is in check right now. It's at 3.1%, which is not at the ideal level. We would want it under 2%, but it's made a comeback, which is quite noteworthy.
Look, we all felt, the effects of inflation. I I mean very early on, beginning of 23, I spoke about how there was a specific sort of instant coffee that I love, right? And to see its price jump by about 10, then 20, then 30, then 40 rand over the period of a year is crazy. And I'm talking about a bit of a luxury, never mind staples, you know. I mean, the price of bread going up affected everybody, the price of transport. So let me ask you a question I've asked you all year round. When will we see a reduction? Because you said it's in check, right? Do you think sometime 2024 we'll see a reversal? Or at
So
least
that's on
things,
everybody's question.
stabilize?
We start out with the first FOMC rate statement
Yeah.
coming up Wednesday, January 3rd.
Oh, wow,
Uh,
very early.
very early, so we hit off out of the gates with a major economic data, economic decision going into
Yeah.
2024. And that's going to be the first out of 8. And it's I don't think for the first, I don't know. I mean, I really don't think for the first 2 or 3 the Federal Reserve is going to change it.
Okay.
But I do believe moving forward, maybe towards the end of the second quarter, if they're fully convinced that inflation is in check and it dips below 2%, then for sure,
Okay.
I think that they'll start tapering off. Now, it's not going to be a big tapering off, but it's going to be tapering off. Now, you have to understand, interest rates have put certain parts of the economy at a standstill.
Yeah.
Anything that is capital intensive, which mostly is in the real estate field, whether
Mm.
it's
No, I've
mortgages,
seen that about a few months
refinancing.
ago. Yeah. Your
So
housing industry suffered a huge blow because of this. Well, no one
Yeah.
wants to take on that kind of debt, and it's the same in South Africa as well. It's currently a bit of a buyer's market when it comes to property.
So it's going to
So
shift back into a seller's market, but right now, um, it's there's a lot
yeah,
of situations where the market is kind of, well, okay, we understand that inflation is a bad thing, and you're going to have to do something for it. But remember, you're affecting the rest of the market, so that is something also that needs to be taken into consideration.
and I guess finally, uh, this is our last sort of podcast for the year. Um, do you have any advice for traders out there? It's been one hell of a year.
It has. It really, really has. I mean, you know, I guess my only advice is write as many things down that you've learned in 2023, because I think 2023, for me at least,
Yeah.
stands out in history as one of the most how should I say this? Uh, educational years.
Mm, I think that's a good way
Um,
of putting it.
because there
It
were so many components. Like you said, there was the so-called banking crisis at the beginning of the year.
yeah.
Fear, fear, fear. And then there was the surge of all the technology companies. Where did that come from? No one talked about that, right? And so it's like you've got to be an informative. You make your own decision. That's my advice. You
Yeah.
be the adult. You be the mature person. You find out for yourself. Don't depend on other people to make decisions for you. So I guess that's my life advice, and it's also my training advice. You have to create your own. You have to formalize your own trading idea. You can't be dependent on other people. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. Okay, that happens, and that's part of life. But
Awesome.
I've learned more from being wrong than being right. I don't know about you, Sergio.
Too
Think
true,
about
man.
it.
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully, we learn from our mistakes and not repeat them. But this year has certainly been a year of learning and overcoming challenges. And here's hoping 2024 will see more learning and fewer challenges. It's time to thrive. I think the last couple of years we've been on survival mode, at least many of us. So I'm hoping 2024 will be the turn. But on that note, thank you, Fred, for all your awesome advice. Can I just say that this, podcast journey with you has been amazing, and that I hope we continue it in 2024.
I'm looking forward to it, Sergio.
Awesome. I'll see you on the next one, man. And Happy New Year.
And to you as well. Happy New Year.